This interview is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History. Hi, I'm Bill Ballinger, editor and publisher of the newsletter Inside Michigan Politics and a member of the Michigan Political History Society. And I'm seated here with a living legend, the first female chairman, and that's what they were called in those days, chairman of a major political party in the history of the United States, Elly Peterson. Elly, nice to have you with us today.
Nice to be with you, Bill.
Let me just start out by asking you, what in your early years in Illinois and in the Red Cross and the military during World War II and maybe later on in Eaton County when you moved to Michigan helped shape your interest in politics or got you motivated to work in politics? Was there a particular candidate at some point in your life that you got excited about, and what led you into political work?
Well, actually, serving in the Red Cross overseas and my husband being in the military really would have turned me off politics, if anything, because they never took any part in politics. But when we moved to Oak Park, Illinois, everybody that was our friend was in a Republican club. It was more social. We didn't know anything about issues, and they wouldn't have let us take any part in it. But I remember the most gruesome day of my life, I think, in politics was when they gave us sunflowers to pass out for Alf Landon, and we walked down Michigan Avenue in the pouring rain, and the yellow paint going down your arm, and following along in his limousine was Colonel McCormick, encouraging us all.
So this was 1936.
Yes, that was when we first did that. So
then later, didn't you do something for Wendell Willkie?
Well, I worked as a volunteer passing out literature, but in those days, young people, and women especially, were not expected to do anything that was worthwhile. And didn't.
So after you got through the 1940 campaign, and then your husband Pete went off to war, and then you joined the Red Cross.
Yes.
And then you came back to this country. I think you came to Kalamazoo at that point, isn't that correct?
Yes, and we were in Kalamazoo when we both went away in the service. We came back to Charlotte. My husband was transferred here.
Well, at that point, is that where you got active in politics in Michigan, like maybe the Eisenhower campaign in 1952?
Well, I got active because I have a friend, Gertrude Powers, and one day I'd been on a trip to the Caribbean, and it was April, and I came back and she said that this man that she knew, Larry Lindemer, had been elected state chairman, and she said, he needs you over in that office. I said, I don't want to drive to Lansing. No, she said, you've got to go over and talk to him.
This was like early 1957, I think.
Right after he got elected, but it was a couple months after he'd gotten elected. So I went over, and Larry was
floundering around.
Well, he wasn't exactly floundering, but he didn't have any help. And it sort of appealed to me, even though the place was terrible.
Now, wasn't this the old Lincoln House on North Capitol Avenue in
old red brick house.
Red brick Victorian, like the houses that are used by Lansing Community College now. Apparently it was a mess, right?
It was so dirty, and there were piles of paper everywhere. And of course, Larry was having trouble sorting it all out, and the only person there who knew where anything was Arnie Levin, who was the public relations director. His desk was always 2 feet high, but he could reach right in the middle of it and pull out what he wanted. But that was the way it was.
So Larry Lindemer, who was an attorney in private practice as chairman, did he become a full-time chairman of the party, or was he kind of putting in part-time, and then you came in as like his assistant and secretary to begin with, and then from then on kind of build up into other roles and were kind of running the office? Is that what happened?
Well, I came in just really as a secretary and do anything that came up kind of person.
You could take shorthand, couldn't you?
Yes, I had been a secretary, and so I did all that. But Larry would have, I think, been happy to work full-time, but the party didn't really have the money, so he did do some legal work on the side. And then as we began to pay our debts and build up a little money, well, then we could hire some other people to help.
Right. Well, now Larry Lindemer told me just this past weekend, he said, you know, it wasn't a case of Elly Peterson growing on the job from secretary on up. He said it was a question of the enormous strengths organizationally and otherwise that she brought to the job. He said, if I, Larry Lindemer, deserve any credit, it's for recognizing what she brought and just standing out of the way and letting her do her thing.
Well,
Is
he's
that
being
true?
he's
Being
being
too
very
generous?
modest. In those days, people organized every precinct, and I found that more fascinating than anything I'd ever done in my life. And and he gave me the responsibility and let me go out and talk to people. And
How did you organize precincts in those days? What did you tell people?
all right, you'd come out here, for example, to the city of Charlotte, and you'd first have a Charlotte meeting. And then there were a couple precincts, and then you'd have a precinct meeting. And we had cards that had been drawn up nationally that told about every voter. And some people were wonderful precinct people. Some were terrible. Mm-hmm. But the best precinct people that I developed was an 80-year-old woman here in Charlotte who knew every voter in her precinct, how they'd vote and if they voted, and Denny Dutko from Macomb County, who was 16
Wow.
and later became a Democratic legislator.
Right, exactly.
He
was a great Republican precinct
Oh, he was one of the best
captain
precinct
here in
chairmen.
Charlotte. Unbelievable.
No, not here in Charlotte, in Macomb County.
In Macomb County. Okay.
But those were two I've
that
never
you can
forget
remember.
them.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, did you feel, in other words, that there were things that you were able to do organizationally then, in terms of organizing precincts, that you couldn't do today? Or is it a question of people just not having the elbow grease or the whatever, the energy to get out and organize today the way they did then? Or do you think it's just such a different game with the media, with TV, radio, and the way campaigns work today, that the way you organized then is just kind of an anachronism today?
Well, it is. In the first place, people began to be afraid to go door to door, which we did. And in the second place, they didn't want to do the telephoning work. We were constantly at that. And then as television developed, everything became money. We had no money, Bill. Mm-hmm. We operated on a shoestring. I can remember once when we didn't have $12 to pay the electric bill. And it took Larry quite a while to build up the financial end of it. But it's a totally different business now that people depend on television and radio rather than on person-to-person contact.
Right.
And I can remember in the Nixon campaign, there was a headquarters in every county in this state, and that's 83 counties.
Now, let me ask you this. In 1961, Larry Lindemer stepped down as chairman. George Van Pearson, who'd been the House Republican leader, Speaker of the House, came in as the chairman of the party, and you, I believe, were elected the vice chairman, right?
Yes.
And so you served 2 years in that capacity, right?
I came and was elected in 61, and then I left in October of 63 when Claire Schenck called from the National Committee in Washington and asked if I would come to be the assistant chairman of the Republican National Committee, which was quite a big deal
Quite an
for
honor,
me.
right. And during those 2.5 years you worked for George Van Pearson, or with him, I should say, you basically were the ones who kind of administered the party organization,
Well,
right?
and did the
organize it. While he did more of the speaking.
Yeah. George Van Pearson was the voice of the party, and he was a brilliant speaker, and he knew everything about issues, so that he was perfect in that regard. But it would not have been his interest to go out and talk to 6 people about organizing a precinct. Whereas if I got 6 people together, I thought it was a great night. So that's what I did. And then we were able to hire a few more people as we got a little money. And so we had others go out, and we just
Okay, so you really build up such a reputation as an organizer that the national people took note of you, asked you to come down and be the assistant chairman of the National Committee in late '63, and you apparently did that for what? Just about less than a year? Because you came back to run for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate.
I just did it until the National Convention, which I believe that year was in July.